Durham's a long way away, isn't it?
Good evening. Sorry about that. Chris might be having the same problem as me. I had to go into email and enter from there. For some reason, the link in the Outlook invite wasn't working. That could be it.
I found out the link in the calendar doesn't work. You have to do it
Yeah,
from email.
yeah.
I don't know
So
why.
I've done it from email as well.
Good evening, Paula. But yeah, I think a lot of us were the same. Yeah.
We will look to sort that out then, because that's inconvenient, isn't it? So we'll look to try and sort that out.
Yeah.
You have to use the Zoom invitation that's from Zoom. So the link to attend is unique to you. So it's not something that I can send.
I understand that, but it puts something into your calendar, and if you click on the calendar link, it doesn't actually work.
Okay.
But normally when this type of system, it goes into your calendar, you can join from the calendar.
Okay.
Sure, we can figure it out anyway. We're all starting to come in at least, so it's all good.
Okay. There's something to talk about. So Chris arrives.
So it's 50 now.
Can
so
you hear me?
we can.
There's Chris.
Quieten down. I'll get going.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Good evening, Chris.
Jolly good. We're on. Don't know what the problem was there. I always leave enough time, but it's never 100%. Hang on.
Okay, so everybody who's listening in, I'm going to make a start. Anyone who's watching the screen at the moment will see some meeting notes on the screen. If you could have a look at those, please, that would help. What it says there is it's a 2-hour meeting starting now and going on till 8:30. And a reminder that it is a public meeting and it is being recorded, anything that you say. The presenters on the panel will be on view. And when we're showing slides, as we are at the moment, you will just see a small window. But when we're having the discussion, the slide window will disappear and you'll be able to see people more easily. Okay. Anyone who has questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We won't be responding to any questions in the chat box if we can help it. And the way to ask a question, please, is to select the raised hand, which is on the bottom of the screen. And please keep your questions and comments brief so that the presenters and panelists can pick up on that. And please keep your microphones muted. Anything that we don't manage to cover tonight, we will cover in email responses after the meeting. Okay, so I hope that's clear to everybody. And let's move on now into the main part of the presentation. So I want to just say good evening to everybody who's here and thank you for coming along. I'm going to start by introducing the panel that we have here tonight. Then I'll outline what we will be covering, and then I will lay out how we are going to proceed through the discussions. So we have an introduction slide here saying who's here tonight. I'm Councillor John Neal. I'm leader of the Farnham Town Council, and I'm a member of the Farnham board that is the overview board that runs this programme as a consultation, as a collaboration between the 3 councils involved. Joining me, we have Councillors Andy MacLeod, who is Andy's the joint chair of these forums, and also Wyatt Ramsdale, who chairs some of them as well. So if anything goes wrong on the technical side tonight with Zoom or anything like that, and I disappear, Andy will take over or Wyatt will take over. The most important people on our side are the members of the programme team who will be presenting here tonight and answering most of the questions for you. Chris Tunstall, you'll see there, is from Surrey County Council. He's the programme director. He has a wealth of experience in running these types of projects around the country, and it's his job to keep everybody in line. Chris will be moving on in the near future, unfortunately, hence the words interim on the slide. and he will be handing over his role to a successor. Then we also have Paula Goff with us. Thank you, Paula. She's from the infrastructure consultancy called Hgvs. Paula has worked on similar projects elsewhere. She's well up on what works and what doesn't, and she knows all about the modern features that people expect to see in the towns and on the highways. She also knows what governments expect to see when we're asking for major funding on these projects. Joining Paula is Alex Pye from the Atkins consultancy. Now, many of you will have heard of the Atkins name. The company works on many major highway projects and helps to solve difficult problems like we have here today in our town. Okay, so moving on to the agenda. And this is how we will be running the session tonight. I will be handing over to Chris and Alex soon, and they will update you on the program so far and present tonight's topics. I will then come back and summarize some of the key aspects on which we are seeking your views. And we will then go into the main part of the evening, which is the opportunity for you to ask questions and for any of the panel to respond. We expect to close the session at about 8:30 tonight. Okay. Now, many of you that have been following the project so far will know that we have held a series of these local liaison forums at the end of last year and in January this year. In those meetings, we discussed the vision statement for the project and listened to your views. In the meantime, the program team had been working on all the previous work, looking at all the previous work and aspects that are relevant in today's situation, to bring everything together into one document. And that is the document that you've seen called the Optimized Infrastructure Plan, or OIP for short. The OIP includes all the views that have emerged from these local liaison forums to date. The OIP was published a few weeks ago alongside a summary version, since the OIP is both long and detailed. We have also presented an online storyboard version of the plan where you can virtually walk around our Farnham Town Hall and browse 10 boards that visualize the OIP content. The program team are going to use these boards tonight to quickly summarize the plan. I hope you have managed to read through some of these publications so that you will already know what we want to discuss tonight. But if you have not, don't worry. I am sure it will all become clear as we go along. After the program team have presented the OIP, we want to get your views on the plan and how you think we should be moving on in terms of priorities. So that's my introduction for tonight. I'm going to hand over now to Chris and Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Can I have the next slide, please? Good evening, everybody. Some of you who have been on the LLFs, a number of you, in fact, will have seen this before. The red star indicates where we're currently at. We've published the draft optimised infrastructure plan. We're consulting on it. It's an outline of potential schemes, possible proposals. It isn't fully detailed. The reason for that was if we start working up fully detailed proposals, one, the accusation will be there we've already made our mind up, which we haven't. We are taking your views and we're taking those views very seriously. It's your town and you've got to have a big say in this. But secondly, there's a big cost. If we worked up proposals and those proposals weren't acceptable proposals, there's a big cost and there's also a big time delay. So what we've got today and what Alex will be going through shortly is an outline of the proposals and what we feel the art of the possible is to improve the environment and help the economy within Farnham. So that's currently where we're at. The proposal will be that we will be going back to the board in May/June. Why not a defined date? Because it's just after the elections and we've got to sort out the outcome of the elections. With your thoughts, and taking those thoughts on board, what we think has come out of that, and we'll finalise the OIP then. And then the individual schemes will be worked up and those will be consulted on as well. So it is a process, it's not jumping to a solution. Thank you. Can I have the next slide, please? So just to remind you, and this is the format that we'll be taking all the way through the presentation, but we can fall back to the boards, as John says. The individual boards are the ones that you can see on the in the consultation room, and they're on the left-hand side. But on the right-hand side, we've tried to succinctly pull that together in a few words, a few sentences. So, I mean, basically, it's a town centre. Farnham's a fantastic place to live. When I first came down to Surrey, my second stint actually in Surrey, I came over to the town centre and couldn't believe what I saw. Beautiful town, just full of traffic and Hgvs, full of congestion and the associated pollution. It's also split in two. We'd never build a road like that these days, but that wasn't built these days. The A31 effectively splits Farnham as a community into two. And it's built as it was, narrow roads, because when it was built, we were talking horse and carts, narrow pavements, and it's unfit for modern use. So all the councils, Waverley, Farnham Town Council and Surrey County Council, have come together to work together to develop this infrastructure programme along with Jeremy Hunt, the local MP. And the OIP presents our thoughts on how we can start making a change in Farnham, and a change for the better. Because if we carry on doing what we're doing, and I know there's a few comments about that, then you'll get what you always got and nothing will change. Something's got to change, and that change will mean a change to how people within Farnham operate and use Farnham itself. Thank you. Next slide, please. So just to remind you on the vision, we consulted on that in the autumn of last year, and this underpins the development. And as John says, one of the questions is, does the OIP, do you feel the OIP actually reflects the vision that was overwhelmingly agreed to back in the autumn? And, you know, the statement that we've got there, the vision statement, to deliver an attractive, well-integrated, future-focused, important, high-quality infrastructure solution for Farnham, where people can choose to live, work, study, and spend their leisure time in sustainable ways. And not to forget, you can't see it on the actual slide, it's a bit too small, but there were 6 objectives there. Health and safety was one, supporting businesses in the economy was a second, responding to the climate emergency, and bear in mind, you know, regardless of what people may say or think, there is an air quality problem in Farnham, and that air quality problem is produced by vehicles. It's not produced by anything else. It hasn't miraculously appeared. It's the volume of vehicles within Farnham that's producing that. Enhanced mobility and connectivity. Yes, there's a big issue. Why, when Alex comes on to his bit, is there a big ownership issue of cars and a big uses of cars in Farnham? Well, part of that is perhaps the lack of other alternatives. So we're looking to enhance mobility and connectivity through other means other than just through cars. Place community first. So this is all part of that. It's not something that we are looking to do to Farnham, but if you really want to change, then obviously you need to tell us what your thoughts are and how we can try and accommodate that and come up with these future proposals. And then taking on board new technology, new digital technology. So that's the vision. And at this point, I'll hand over, and you can come back and we can debate that. But at this point, I'll hand over to Alex to go through the OIP. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Chris. Evening all. As Chris has highlighted, we're planning to run through the boards. The sort of salient summary points are sort of highlighted in the blow up boxes on the right hand side. So this would be board 3 from the consultation material. Just to highlight some of the existing sort of travel patterns around Farnham and the current condition of the town. Obviously on the positives, it's got a great strong economy. There's a highly skilled population, which to an extent drives the high levels of economic activity that are currently present in the town, but also is one of the core drivers for future growth as people look to move to the area as an attractive place to live, raise families and seek employment. Town centre, as Chris has briefly alluded to, characterised by quite heavy traffic, quite an issue with Hgvs and goods vehicles, narrow footways, some severance issues caused by the river, the rail line and the A31. And with those vehicle movements comes poor air quality, as Chris has mentioned. There is quite a high car dependency, as Chris has mentioned, and if we could move on to the next slide. That also means there's a bit of a low uptake of public transport, and some of that is due to the lack of interconnected routes, so bus services not reaching where people want to go or the frequencies that they would like to see that would encourage them to utilise that mode. On a positive side, walking is quite a popular choice for some of the shorter journeys, but cycling quite a bit less popular than the Surrey and the national average. And as Chris has mentioned, there is an impact with Hgvs on local communities, with those roads characterised by quite narrow footways and narrow carriageways in some instances. That means that their impact is stronger than it would otherwise be in a different townscape. Moving to the future, there is significant growth forecast over the next 30 years. That's obviously a good thing in many ways. It shows the vitality of the town, the strength of the economy and what it can offer to residents and business owners. But it does mean that coming alongside that growth, there is forecasted increase in traffic, and that's supposed to be quite significant based on the modelling that we've undertaken, showing a 40% increase in the total amount of vehicle miles or kilometres travelled in a year. Obviously, without any action to mitigate or offset that will drive an increase in carbon emissions, and that will also bring a detriment in terms of worsening the air quality issues that the town unfortunately already suffers. We're forecasting at the moment that, based on just looking at the government mandated ban on the sale of internal combustion engine petrol and diesel powered cars, in essence, from 2030 onwards, unfortunately that in and of itself isn't enough to get to the net zero target that the UK as a nation has signed up to by 2050. If we could move to the next slide, please. So the key OIP objective areas, which are the sort of coloured boxes on the right hand side of the main board from the consultation, are to rapidly reduce those carbon emissions to drive better air quality, create well-connected communities, support Farnham's economy, and improve the quality of the place in the town centre and its environs and surrounds so that everyone can enjoy the place that they've chosen to live. If we moving on, we're now looking at some of the potential options that we touched on, and as Chris has rightly highlighted, these are just potential options. That's why we've gone to consultation with some fairly high-level options to gauge the thoughts and views of those who live, work and study in the town, whether they're ticking the boxes in terms of what people want for the vision. For the town centre, we've looked at a number of measures. Really, the goal is to integrate the town centre so that we've got high quality public spaces, but also there are those routes to get to those high quality places, driving improvements in walking routes from those new development areas, because that will be crucial to ensure that any new developments such as Brightwells are a success and add to the town, that they're well integrated. Improvements to walking and cycling routes into the town, so not just those that are in the town centre, but how people could get there from neighbouring communities. Some major changes to the town centre road layout to try to reduce that congestion and air quality issue that's currently plaguing the town. Better management of car parking. So within that, we'll look at a review of the existing car parks, quantums, locations, that they're in the right places, look at supplementing that with new park and ride and park and stride sites to try and keep congestion out of the town centre, where we might look to drive improvements in terms of wider footways, but ensure that people can still drive if that's the only mode that they have available to them. In conjunction with that, we're looking at new public transport hubs. So for public transport hubs, I'm conscious that might be a phrase that some people haven't come across. There's sort of two facets there. One is the pure sort of transport element, so places where people can interchange between modes, so say between rail, bus, but also look at other connection hubs, so ensure that there's sufficient provision there for cycle parking, potentially look at cycle hire facilities, so if someone arrives by train, they can get to their next destination. But the second facet is adding in other planning element. So creating a hub where people can actually use that as a destination. So if you're arriving by train, there might be a Sainsbury's local where you could grab your shopping on your route home. So it's about making trips connected so that you don't have to make as many trips to get the same things that you need to get done. There'll be a fundamental review of bus services because we're conscious that there are gaps there, as I alluded to earlier. Off-street locations for deliveries. Most town centres experience the same problem. If you're having deliveries on the street, that can cause congestion, it can cause issues. And also look at freight consolidation centres to try and keep some of those goods vehicles that are essential to the running of the town and the vitality of the businesses, so that they're still viable. Those activities can still take place, but they have less of an impact on everyone in the town. If we could move on, please. Moving to North Farnham, I guess it's worth me quickly highlighting here because I'm conscious there are some discrepancies in terms of both North and South Farnham. What we've used is the geographical spread. So rather than looking at electoral boundaries, when we say North Farnham, we mean north of the sort of core historic town centre. And when we say South Farnham, we mean south of the A31. So for North Farnham, we're looking at a number of traffic management measures. We've had quite a lot of engagement with residents in the area. We understand and appreciate that there are some existing issues with congestion, speed, goods vehicles. So those traffic management measures will be pretty wholesale. We'll look at reducing speeds where we can. We'll look at measures to help facilitate that. Some of those will be physical measures, not just signing. We'll also look at improved walking and cycling options to try and improve some of the deficiencies where residents have rightly highlighted that there are in places no footways. Where there are footways present, they're not always continuous, or they're only on one side of the road, or they're very narrow. So really driving that connection so that we've got good permeability for people to get around. We're looking at some routes, improvements to routes through the park so that people can enjoy traffic-free routes, wider pavements, narrower roads in some instances where that's sensible and safe to do so. We're also looking at enhancing the bus service provision. Working closely with colleagues in Hampshire, we've had quite a lot of meetings with them to ensure seamless travel. So looking at bus services being integrated so that people can get onwards journeys through into Hampshire, pedestrian and cycle provision so that it doesn't just disappear or change materially when you get to that county border. And an initial assessment of potential benefits of a western bypass. There's a lot of feelings both pro and anti that from amongst the community, so that needs to be investigated not only in terms of financial viability but also economic and carbon impacts. And quick wins to tackle the impact of Hgvs and speeding traffic, which are being progressed in parallel with the OIP. And then moving to South Farnham, as I said, we're talking about anything south of the A31 when we refer to that. We're looking at further studies for Recklesham, including investigation of a bypass, similar studies to what I've just mentioned for the western bypass. Same sort of schemes for improved walking and cycling. So looking at improved permeability, where possible, that'll be segregated cycling to make it safer for children getting to school, those who are perhaps less confident. Further studies of the station area, ways to tackle the severance that's experienced there that arises from not only the rail line, but also the river and the road. Options to reduce traffic around the level crossing area, which is an existing issue. New bus routes, better bus infrastructure through Recklesham. And then the same quick wins to look at tackling the impacts of speeding in that area. If we could move on, please. For the A31 corridor itself, again, this is an area that gets a lot of mixed commentary from what residents have told us, but it is an area that requires further work, looking at whether we can address the issues at Hgvs Corner and in what manner and format that will be. There obviously have been historic studies in that area, but the business case historically wasn't very strong for that option. So we need to look at other alternatives to make sure that whatever option we can deliver is actually financially deliverable with the support from central government. Full integration with the town centre, so looking at reducing the severance that's experienced for people trying to cross the A31, because that really does cut the town in two. Junction improvement packages, so looking at Coxbridge, Hgvs Corner, Shepherd and Flock, those key areas where congestion is experienced. What can we do in terms of design options to try and mitigate that? And then, as we've just already alluded to, improvements at the level crossing itself. So there are a wide range of options that could solve the problems facing those areas, but it's not as straightforward or as simple as some of the other measures that we're proposing in the town. So there will be a bit of work to be done there. And then for those Farnham-wide measures, because the town needs to be looked at in a holistic approach, we need to ensure that if we do something in the north, something is connected to the south, that there's that through permeability. So we're looking at whether we can reduce the need for individuals to have a private vehicle, because that's something that we'll potentially need to look at down the road. So potential for car clubs, if you only need a car occasionally, to make that easier for people. Utilising a travel app so that there's a bit more interconnected information so that if you're transitioning from a bus to train, you've got that information available, looking to put in journey times, arrival times, so that it's easier. You're not waiting for a service to arrive. Working with schools to increase walking and cycling, and crucially, the infrastructure to make that safe and an attractive prospect, so that it's actually a viable option. Improving the footpaths, looking at priority streets for pedestrians so that they're safer, that people feel they can cross the road, that it's not dangerous, narrow, overgrown, or beset by speeding vehicles. Improves paths and cycling through the town and connecting to all the communities. Potentially looking at hire or subsidised purchase of e-bikes and e-scooters. Certainly the former, the e-bikes, could assist with some of the topographical issues that Farnham has that might mean it's not possible for certain people to utilise bikes. Piloting and potentially rolling out low traffic neighbourhoods where there's resident support for those. So if there's a route to a school where lots of children are crossing, those could be a very viable solution to make it safer. Improving the bus stops and services, looking at, of course, electric and ultra low emission buses, so that crucially we're driving carbon out of the public transport infrastructure as well as from private vehicles. And then reviewing fares and routes so that those are also attractive. So as Chris has highlighted, what we're really keen to do is, now that we've launched the consultation, is to get people's views on whether the OIP is meeting the objectives that we outlined in the vision that was tabled last year, what people think of the proposed options that we've tabled, whether there's something we've missed, whether you'd like to see changes, additions, and whether you think that this is really tackling the root causes of some of the issues that the town is experiencing at the moment. Crucially, we would like to see your views on whether the OIP proposals would encourage or enable, through some of the infrastructure and plans that we're proposing, and encourage you to be able to change your travel behaviour. And if we introduce new bus services, would that be enough to get you to consider leaving your car at home for some journeys? And does that OIP support the vision for the town that you have? Not only the vision that we have that was outlined last year, but your own views. Thank you.
John, are you picking up for the next bit, or?
You're muted, John, if you don't realise that.
Sorry, no, I didn't realise I was muted. It's always someone, isn't there? I was saying, could we just go back on that slide that Alex had up, that last one? My video had gone as well for some reason. Okay, we're back on track. Thank you. So I'm overlapping a little bit on what Alex has just said here. You've seen the range of options that the OIP presents in response to the problems and enhancements we're looking for. So we're now looking for your views on these. Now, we would like to get your views on how we address the difficult questions. We all know that solving one problem can often create a different problem or shift the problem elsewhere. That, of course, happens in all projects of this nature around the country, where there's limited options available, both in space and in technical complexity. So inevitably, there will have to be some compromises, both in the technical solutions and in all our personal and local preferences. We need to take everybody along as best we can, as much as possible on this journey. So we want your views on these sort of compromises as well. On top of this, we need to recognise what is happening in the world around us, both at the national level and in the wider context. So here we are talking about climate change, air pollution issues that have already been touched on. We are talking about the need for us all to get fitter, to try and use our cars less, and a whole host of well-being aspects, like the desire to give children greater freedom and independence when they're out on the roads, their ability to walk or cycle to school without their parents having to be concerned about their safety all the time. So, two big questions here. If we want to make the improvements that the OIP offers, will that encourage you to adapt to the changed situation? Will you be prepared to use the bus sometimes instead of a car if the services, the bus services are better? And would you be encouraged to take up cycling more often if you're still young and fit? We're not trying to say that everybody's going to get on a bike. We know people will still want to get around in a car. But, we're looking for changes and what people are prepared to go along with here. And the second question there is quite simple. Does the OIP support the vision for the town that we consulted on right back at the beginning of the programme? So thank you for listening to us on the panel so far. And now it's over to you with your questions and to give us your views on the programme so far. Thank you. So I'm ready to take questions.
John, it may be, if I can jump in, there's been a lot of questions about congestion in the town centre and won't pollution be made worse with widening footways and, won't putting 20 miles per hour in create pollution. The point that's been missed is we are looking to reduce the volume of traffic. Yes, of course. If we don't reduce the volume of traffic and we take traffic lanes out, then what's being suggested is more than likely. But the point of all the problems within Farnham, on most of the problems, unless someone's going to tell me differently, are the vehicles that are in Farnham. Because as individuals, we don't produce pollution. We don't produce pollution as we walk around. Cars produce pollution. Heavies produce pollution, and unless we get a number of those out, and this is not saying cars bad by any stretch of the imagination, but what we're saying is let's look to do things differently. If this was an issue, we'd have never ever pedestrianised any town centre within this country. So to say that Farnham's unique, that it can't live with an element of widened footways or even possibly full pedestrianisation is a total misnomer, because if that's the case, we'd have never done it anywhere. And that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to try and get volumes of traffic out by, as Alex says, providing alternatives. And it is getting those alternatives in before. Just we need to get this in perspective. The point I made earlier was, seriously, if we don't change what we're currently doing, nothing will change in Farnham. And is that what everybody, is that what the general consensus is? That nothing needs to change in Farnham? I don't think that's the case. It might be one or two people's views, but I don't think that's the general case. That might be a bit contentious, but it might generate some discussion.
Can I pick that up? I've been asked to unmute, so I'm not sure whether that's a request for me to speak.
Stuart, go ahead.
Thank you. Chris, I take the point that you're making, and I think the actual report is brilliant. The report in terms of identifying the issues and the possible options, it is the sort of thing that's required. The issue that I've got it almost springs out of what you were saying, that nowhere is there a real focus on the absolute necessity to actually keep the town economically viable as these changes take place. The impression is really that traffic has to be moved out, full stop, not that we have to assess the traffic, and as new features are brought into the system, which are all very well identified, that then there will be a change in the amount of traffic which can be allowed into Farnham. It's the impression is that you just squeeze and see what happens. As a second and final point, can I just make the comment? I was a councillor something like 15 years ago, and one of the things which we waited for and waited for and waited for in Brightwells was a proper traffic survey which identified where traffic was coming in, where it was parking, where it was going to. And the fact that the report is completely absent, it might be hidden in the small print, but I can't see it, on the absolutely integral requirement to understand the traffic and parking of Farnham as you make the changes, is something that's necessary. Thanks.
Can I come back on that, John?
Yes, please, Chris.
Point well made, Stuart. And I don't disagree with that at all. And in fact, what we'd be looking to put in, the OIP is very much a view on ideas, on proposals that we could do. The rationale for that was, if we launch straight into well, we're going to pedestrianise the borough, I'm not suggesting that, by the way, but if we launch straight into something like that, people would say, well, you haven't looked at all the options and alternatives. And that's what the OIP is trying to do. Once we get feedback. So yes, the car parks, I have a view. It's my view, personal view. The car parks in the centre of Farnham are part of the problem because they attract traffic. Now, you go to other places in the country and they have park and rides. What is it that's unique about Farnham that it can't sustain a park and ride? And yes, you're perfectly right. You'd need to provide these beforehand. What you don't do, as I call them, it's the carrots. You put the carrots in first. You put in little hopper buses that provide alternatives for people. You put in cycle routes that provide alternatives. You put in cycle hire. You put in electric bike hire. You put all sorts of things in. You're perfectly right. Those are the things that you need to put in before you start looking at taking other things out. And that would, from my point of view, that is certainly the direction we're going. But rather than launch into this is the solution, we want to go through and try and develop this with people. Now, if the general consensus is we need these car parks where they are, I have to say to you, I don't know what's going to change. Seriously, what will change in Farnham if you keep your car parks as they are and people are accessing them as they currently do? I certainly haven't got a magical wand. I can't magic out of thin air that I can give you a better environment, keeping the same issues that we've currently got. So it is that balance, but you're perfectly right. It is about putting the alternatives in first. So certainly for me, that's what we're looking to do.
That's a really good point, Chris. And I think just to expand on Stuart's other question, just around the data, we have undertaken some modelling and some analysis, but it was based on older data and modelling because COVID scuppered the plans to do an awful lot last year, because any new data we would have secured in 2020 would have been unrepresentative because of the travel restrictions. So the plan is certainly to refine and update that as the year moves on. And if we need to secure new data as and when things start to unlock, then obviously that's something we will be doing.
Chris, can I also just suggest that we add and clarify, just picking up on the number of questions on the Q&A, that we're going to be bringing a package of solutions together so that it enables this reduction of car parking by bringing better bus service, more reliable bus service, more frequent bus service, so that it then helps people to leave that car at home and actually take the bus option, or providing safe and quality cycle infrastructure as well as cycle parking so that people can go for that option if they would like to. It's as a package that it makes the interventions possible. So just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I go to Wyatt Ramsdale, please? Wyatt, if you're talking, please unmute.
Thank you, John. I've been waiting some time to speak, and I don't take kindly to people who are interjecting without using the raise hand function. I'd really like to support what Chris had to say about congestion. The congestion arrived long before the orcas or the cones or any other mechanism to reduce the speed. Farnham has had congestion ever since I got here. Every time a car breaks down in the one-way system, every time somebody needs to repair a gas main or a water main or do some work of any kind on the roads. As the traffic numbers, as the people numbers get bigger, as more people try to pile into the central car park, it's only going to get worse unless we do something. Chris has some drastic ideas, some of us would think, but that's why we're consulting. That's why we're trialing things. That's why we're doing temporary bans of HGVs to see, do these work? Do they take the traffic out of the town centre? Please, everybody, think laterally, think what you want the town to look like in the future, and then give us your views in the consultation process. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Wyatt. Andy McLeod.
Thanks, John. I'd just like to comment briefly on the points that Stuart made. I think he made two very good points. In terms of Brightwells, Stuart, I agree with you that the proper work was not done on the traffic implication of Brightwells. In fact, I was concerned that they would work at all. And this program has given us the opportunity to really look at that and say that the Brightwell stuff shouldn't be looked at in isolation, and it should be done in conjunction with the Farnham infrastructure project. And that's actually what's happening. Chris and his team are now looking at what Chris Nicholson are planning to do and looking for an integrated solution. The second point I'd make actually, that you were absolutely right that the OIP doesn't say exactly how we're going to get there. You know, it actually says where we're going. But I myself am a believer in evolution rather than revolution, if you like. I don't think we can suddenly change the sort of things that are in OIP. We've got to evolve to get there. And I'm sure the actual program plans that will come out at the next stage will take everything you said into account, Stuart. There'll be proper plans of how we get there. We're not going to just junk everything that happens now and move to it suddenly and hope it all works. There'll be proper analysis of how we get there. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Let's go on to another questioner, please. Jason Stewart.
Hi there. Thank you, John. So some of the proposals look great in the centre, but you talk a lot about being future focused, the air quality, government net zero, and to use our cars less. So environmental impact's clearly a high priority. How's a Western bypass even being considered, as it be catastrophic not only for local countryside and wildlife, but it incentivizes car travel? It doesn't do anything to solve the issue, just kind of shifts it. So how can that be considered?
Chris?
Because a number of people have raised it. I don't disagree with what you say at all in this day and age, but we haven't stopped road building per se. But yes, you're right that we have all the evidence that says as soon as you build a road, again, it's like car parks, it's a honeypot, the bees arrive, i.e. the cars. But people have asked about that because a number of people feel that that would resolve the issues within some of the urban areas of Farnham. So like most of the comments we get, we are exploring that. We're not saying one way or another whether or not it's feasible. On its own, an out-and-out road would struggle. But that's not to say we will not look at it as positively as we can look at it.
Great, thank you. I was just going to say that some of the roads that have been built, obviously the A331 and obviously the A31 originally, redirecting traffic. I mean, looking at some of the M3 signposting, it doesn't necessarily work, and it brings HGVs where it shouldn't do. So, I mean, I'll let someone else speak, but I appreciate you answering that question. Thank you very much.
Just to answer that, Jason, the HGV restriction that we're already looking at, the order will be advertised on the 19th of March. We will look to re-sign. We're working with Highways England, subject to us not getting any adverse consultation on it and it being agreed to go ahead. Then we are already talking with Highways England to tell HGVs, for example, that it's not suitable to come through Farnham. In fact, there will be a weight restriction if they're not using it for access, or if they're just using it to run through.
Thanks very much.
Okay, can I go on to the next question? Christopher Whitehouse, please.
Yep. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, so perhaps not so much a question, but as you asked for, comment to see whether people agreed with what was said. So mainly in the main, I agree with pretty much all that was said in the presentation. Status quo, not ideal, needs to change. So one question that was asked was effect on my own car use. In my particular case, I don't drive into the town centre because I'm driving northwards for work. So perhaps some of the North Farnham stuff, but even then, really not so. But I'm not driving into the town at all, really. I would agree, and I would second what was said about car parks in the centre of Farnham. I think the central car park in particular. I don't know. I just see that, and my heart weeps at the land value gone to waste in attracting more cars and more pollution into the town. As has been said, there's no reason why shifting that car park just a little bit outside couldn't serve the same function while not increasing pollution, forcing people into the one-way system, and could be used for shops, offices, or even homes, which would obviously be, as a renter, would tend to be my preference. And I think generally as well, I think it's worth pointing out to some people that almost always when there's like greater pedestrianisation mooted by towns, everyone's rather concerned about potential economic impact, in terms, particularly shop owners, because they worry that people won't be able to drive up and by. But generally speaking, once that happens, people do adjust, and actually turns out people spend money rather than cars. So actually people tend to see an increase in spending, which is good. So, and I think also, yeah, it's a bit tricky because I think it's easy to sort of criticize some of the measures being made and that they won't immediately fix the problem, etc., etc. But some of these things are a bit chicken and egg. Buses being the perfect example, where people might say, "Oh, well, buses aren't good enough," and then, well, part of the reason buses aren't good enough is because buses are very slow because they get stuck in a one-way system where cars are being drawn in by the central car park. So, yeah. So all in all, I pretty much agree heartily with the aims and the individual measures outlined, and yeah, in particular, for example, the central car park, for me, apparently that's an iconoclastic view, but for me that's an obvious one. It's like that seems like a huge waste of prime real estate in a very charming Surrey town. So yeah, that's it really.
Thank you, Chris. There was another question on the Q&A session relating to this. Chris Tunstall, where is the funding coming from for any extra bus services and the infrastructure for the electric fleet? Having fought to get the 46 Farnham to Guildford bus, I'm not aware of any more funding for buses. Would you like to comment on that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the electric buses, the County Council just agreed at its last cabinet but one to invest, the absolute figures, sorry, I can't recall, but it was well over 30 million in working with the operators to invest in electric buses. Now, there are issues there that you've got to be careful about, but that money's on the table. So the county's already put significant amount of money to invest in electric buses on the table. In terms of running buses, that is always a problem. Most councils are asset rich in terms of capital, but they're revenue poor, the day-to-day running costs, because it's primarily the day-to-day running costs that come out of council tax and so on. But there are ways and means of dealing with that. So, an example I'm aware of was that we provided park and rides, and the park and rides subsidised to hop a bus around the town. So that's one way of dealing with it. Another way of dealing with it is that you can buy the bus out of your capital. So the county's got capital on the table, and that reduces the cost of running, because the capital cost of the bus is no longer something that you've got to factor in as private transport companies like Stagecoach have to do. So there are ways and means, but yes, it's like most things in life. If money wasn't an issue, it would be soon resolved, but unfortunately money is an issue, but there are ways and means that we can look at it.
Thank you, Chris. Wyatt, did you want to come in on that one?
Yes, I did, because I mean, Chris didn't know the number involved. There's actually a £50 million budgeted on energy efficient buses, or proposals for, but it's not just electric. It could also be hydrogen driven buses, and I think also perhaps hybrids, where in the more rural areas they'll be electric in the town, but perhaps using their diesel engines on longer journeys.
Thank you, Wyatt. Could we go on to David Johnston, please?
Yes, thank you very much, John. At the beginning, we were asked a couple of questions, and one of them was, if I remember correctly, what would encourage you to change your behaviour in terms of getting into the town? And in my case, although I am a cyclist, I currently don't cycle into the town. And I think that leads to a couple of comments, really, stroke questions. The first one is about the 20-mile-per-hour zone. And I do believe that in earlier meetings, this was discussed. And I'm talking now about a town-wide 20-mile-per-hour zone, rather than the sort of piecemeal approach that I think we can see in the OIP so far. So I'd like to think that a town-wide approach should be considered as an option, because in terms of feeling safe about travelling in, we all know that there is speeding traffic on the main approaches into the town, whether that's Firgrove Hill, stroke the Frensham Road, whether it's down Recklesham, whether it's Castle Street, Folly Hill. So we've certainly got a problem on the approach roads, but equally on the residential roads, there are huge problems with speeding traffic. So I think there are attractions well documented of taking a broader approach, and I'd like to think that the town-wide approach would be on the agenda. And then secondly, you absolutely need a properly joined up cycle network. Now, I know there's a lot of reference to that in the material, but the specific proposals in the maps, are woefully short of what you might call a joined up cycle network, properly segregated. So, in terms of responding to your question, I think those are 2 points that I'd put out there. I think we need to be more ambitious on 20 mile per hour, and we do need a proper segregated cycle network to make people feel safe to sort of ditch the car for journeys into town.
Okay, thank you, David. Who's going to respond to that?
Alex, I'll let somebody else talk.
I'm happy to jump in, Chris. Thanks for that, David. No, it's useful to get some extra feedback on those points. I guess tackling them in sort of order in which they've come. On speed, we have looked at initially a town centre, sort of historic town centre 20-mile-an-hour zone, but then also 20-mile-an-hour speed reductions on some of the routes into and out of Farnham, so including some of the roads you've just mentioned, Recklesham Road, Firgrove Hill, Castle Street, a few others. I'm not sure if I can pop a link very easily here, but there is a full speed study report that we undertook end of last year, start of this year, that's publicly available and shared on Surrey's website, which details the surveys that we've undertaken and some of the proposals. It's worth quickly highlighting that both Surrey Police and national legislation has quite strict rules on how you can enforce speed changes. And it depends to a large extent on the speeds that are recorded. So where a road has a mean speed over 7 days of under 24 miles an hour, you can just amend that speed limit through a traffic regulation order and drop it to 20 miles an hour just using signage. But where the speed is above 24 miles an hour, that requires physical measures be implemented. So whether that's horizontal measures like build outs to narrow the road, rumble strips, or vertical measures like speed bumps. So what we've proposed differs in different locations because we're constrained by that national and Surrey policy in terms of how we tackle problems relating to speeding. So the design has to be and the approach has to be appropriate to the location. But yeah, I'm sure we can find a way to share that link with people who are interested. On cycling, yeah, you're right. The routes initially, they're high level, they're indicative. We are liaising at the moment in terms of producing LC whips and more detailed studies to expand upon those. But obviously, we were keen to get feedback and views from residents as to which routes people would like to cycle on, which ones they wouldn't, because what we don't want to do is invest money in a route that someone is just never going to utilise. So it's all about getting views from people during the consultation and sessions like this to determine where those studies and that investment goes.
Is it just worth clarifying that LC WIP is a local cycling and walking implementation plan, Alex?
It is, yeah. Thanks
And
for
also,
jumping in there, Paula.
And the fact that there is a UK standard for this now that requires the segregation, and so we don't have a choice but to follow that, and obviously we'd be following that happily.
Thank you, Paula.
Just well, thank you very much, Alex. I mean, just coming back on the 20 mile per hour point. I mean, I think, as has been said earlier, you know, this is not going to be easy, and we shouldn't necessarily just pursue the easiest route. And so I think we ought to do what's right. And if we need to be innovative and creative and aggressive, then you know, let's do that, because I really do think that a piecemeal approach is confusing for motorists. And what's more, it's expensive to implement. I think people can understand, you know, a broad area as opposed to sort of coming in and out of differing speed limits. So I put that on the table and say that I'd like to think we seriously consider that through this process.
Okay, thank you, David. Let's move on to Tim Stanley, please.
It was just a question regarding the a comment about the traffic from the north. I mean, for a long time, it seems like the priority has always been southern and east-west, and traffic does go from the north, and Western bypass would relieve traffic that has to transit down. At the moment, if you block off the traffic that is going down Castle Street and Folly Hill, you end up putting it down onto the other roads that are in that area, which are already crowded. So you do have to, if you don't want traffic to go to the middle, you have to have something which allows them to go to the west. You do have traffic which transits, and the infrastructure doesn't allow it unless you actually allow people to get an alternative route to get to the south. Not everybody stops in the middle of town. Secondly, the parking, there seems to be a priority to southern and east-west traffic. There is no parking for traffic coming from the north. So bike wells and getting in the centre town, you have to be able to park. You'll get to parking somewhere if you're going to take a car, if you're going to have any transport. And cycling is not applicable for everybody. Buses aren't applicable for everybody. You can't get away from. Some people will need to transit town. Some people will need to use cars or other transport. Where there's low energy, whether it's electric, they still have to use a vehicle in some cases, some people. That's just my comment. Oh, and by the way, 20 miles an hour, it does work.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone to respond there?
No, I just agree with what's been said. I think Paul has summed it up. If we can, a lot of this is about winning hearts and minds because it's change. You know, most of us don't like change. We do it, and it's a slow process, but we don't volunteer for change readily, and I class myself in that. And it's about winning people's hearts and minds and showing what the art of the possible is. And, you know, we're still getting the numbers of questions. It has always been the case. We are looking to provide the alternatives first. And I don't know where in the OIP it says anything different. Of course, we're looking to improve bus services. Of course, we're looking to provide maybe alternative park and stride, park and ride. Of course, we're looking to provide cycling. We're not going to suddenly remove everything in the town centre without the alternatives. We are going to do that. But Paul has summed it up in terms of if we can get one or two of these accepted, then we can build on that. Yes, going for the big bang sometimes works. Sometimes it doesn't, and you lose everything.
Thank you, Chris. Can I go to Damien Blower, please? Damien, you're muted.
Apologies, I thought you were unmuting, not me, right? I noticed that. First, I'd like to commend you all for the work you've done. It's excellent, thank you, and with real momentum, and that's very tangible and gives great deal of confidence, certainly to me, that things could well happen. I'm going to start by making a slightly flippant point, but it's going to move quite quickly to a serious one. The collective noun is often used as a sort of, in a dominant narrative. So, for example, we talk about the royal family, which is actually several families, whereas the rest of us mere mortals are families. So it slightly concerns me that we often talk about traffic in the collective, which becomes a kind of dominant narrative, but actually traffic is drivers. There are multiple drivers. And yet in the report and in the language we use, we often describe pedestrians in the plural and cyclists in the plural. And I'd like to ask if the OIP could perhaps consider changing their language so that the dominant collective noun is the pedestrian and the cyclist, and we consider changing the word traffic to drivers, and we cease using the word traffic at all, and we talk about drivers. And what I'd like to then propose is that there is then that we break up what effectively the traffic is into a multiplicity of individual drivers all doing different things, and therefore changing the language I think would be really helpful to change the narrative.
Okay, thank you. Anyone like to respond there?
No, we'll take that, we'll bear that in mind.
Okay.
I think there's a very interesting point made there, and perhaps instead of using traffic, and we tend to assume that means the engine vehicles, if we talked about drivers, pedestrians and cyclists, I can see how that would help us all understand that different people with different choices. So thank you, David.
Thank you. Sophia Lavelle.
Good evening, everybody. I've been listening with a great deal of interest, all the things that have been said, particularly Stuart Edge, who I've known for some time. He made a very good point, and I did wonder myself, traffic reports. Chris, you've talked on many occasions about how a lot of the traffic that goes into the town is probably local traffic. Well, I do take issue with that, actually. Having stood, and I actually stood with Andy MacLeod quite some years ago when we did a traffic survey at the level crossing. We had a development proposed in South Farnham, and we had to do our own traffic survey to prove that the volume of traffic that came at the pinch point at the level crossing was excessive. And actually, we did a survey from 7 a.m. in the morning until 9 in the evening. And that was a lot of residents. So it wasn't just me and Andy. And actually, we recorded 4,000 cars that crossed that level crossing. Obviously, that was pre-COVID. But a lot of those vehicles were not locals. A lot of it was through traffic. Going onto the bypass, turning left to go towards Coxbridge, turning right to go to the Shepherd and Flock. A very limited number went actually straight on into the town. So I would suggest that Stuart's quite right in what he said. We ought to be doing a bit more in serious terms of a traffic survey to actually establish the fact that we've all got to change our lifestyles. And, I agree wholeheartedly that yes, we should. And yes, we should be walking and cycling. And I want to be really positive about what the OIP says and what everybody is suggesting. But please, I don't know who it was, but somebody said, we've got to do what is right. We've got to be aggressive. Yes, but don't forget all those people who cannot walk and cycle everywhere, all the mums that have to go to 2 or 3 schools every day, all the dads that have to go shopping to the shops or wherever people have to go in order to have a decent lifestyle. So in terms of the Hickley's Corner how do people get across the traffic, across the bypass? Yes, that is a real problem for pedestrians, and I have been one of those quite regularly. And actually, it would be quite nice to cycle over that bypass and to walk over. So could I suggest maybe a nice little bridge rather than a hugely expensive roundabout? Could that be on the list, the to-do list? Thank you.
Sophia, I think the OIP actually identifies that. Alex, is that not the case?
Hi, Chris. Yes, it is identified as a potential option and one that we'll be pursuing in parallel with some of the other options that people have said they'd like to see investigated there in terms of underpass, overpass. As Sophia said, there's varying degrees of cost associated with all of those different options. So we'll be exploring those.
Okay, thanks very much.
The other thing, Sophia, when I must admit, and perhaps this is my fault, when I'm talking about through traffic, I am looking at the centre of Farnham, the historic centre, because there seems to be this view that if we can just get rid of the through traffic off West Street and East Street and possibly down Castle Street, all our problems, and South Street, all our problems will be solved. And some of this, and yes, we have got traffic data, and yes, we have got, in addition to Atkins, there's a firm working with us doing the traffic modelling, and they've been involved in developing the OIP, and we have used data that we had previously. We would have liked to have done a full survey, a full what we could term origin and destination survey. But when we started this, if people will recall, we unfortunately had COVID. So doing that now is a waste of time. And really, we don't want to have to say to people, well, let's wait until traffic gets back to its normal levels, and then we'll do an O&D survey, which could be 12 months down the line. So we're using what we've already got, but it is primarily in the town centre. I'm more than happy to have a discussion as to why anybody in their right mind comes off the A31 at Coxbridge, winds the way through West Street, East Street, and reappears at Shepherd and Flock when they can stay on the A31. Why would anybody in their right mind do that? As a driver, seriously, would anybody on this call today suggest that that's what they do, unless they were wanting to access somewhere in Farnham? Okay, North Street, South Street might be Castle Street, South Street might be slightly different. And I accept that. And we are dealing with that in terms of certainly looking at Hgvs, which seems to be one of the big issues on Castle Street with the Hgv restrictions. So your point is well made. And as I say, sorry, my take on where they're coming and going from is very much around Farnham Town Centre itself.
Thank you, Chris. Wyatt, did you come in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on Chris saying who does it in their right mind. We had one of the LLFs, and the speaker came in and said, well, I do, because sometimes it's quicker to go from Coxbridge to the Shepherd and Flock through the centre of town. I think that's probably when the A31 so-called bypass is largely blocked at rush hour, and the shops haven't opened yet, so the East Street, West Street are relatively quiet. But clearly that's an abuse, and that is through traffic. I think through traffic is one of these sort of variable features that we use, and really what we mean is traffic that could go and would be better going round the outside, whether that's using the A331 or the A31, or simply staying on the M3 for a bit longer before coming round to Farnham or cutting across to Guildford. It's just a matter of proportion.
Thank you, Wyatt.
It's a good point, Wyatt, that yes, of course, when there's heavy congestion on the A31, people may well do that. And I fully accept that. Of course, the way to stop it is to make it less attractive. To make it less attractive means reducing the traffic lanes down. To reduce the traffic lanes down means that people that are accessing the town centre for the car parks, all the big issues, well, we get congestion then. Well, what do you do? I can't ban. There isn't such an order that says if you're not accessing, as a car, if you're not accessing the town centre, you can't use the town centre. There's no such ban that I can use. I can advise it, I can do all sorts of things, but I can't actually physically ban it. I can do it with Hgvs, but not with cars.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Simon Farr.
Thanks very much, and thank you all for a really useful evening. I've got a question on car parks and the park and ride, but I've been listening and I just wanted to endorse what Chris was saying about the 20-mile-per-hour zone widely around Farnham, and also particularly pick up on David Johnston's point, and to emphasise that actually I think what we really need is a coherent plan. I know I've made this point before, and Chris, I hear what you're saying about the difficulty of doing that, but this is such a complex issue with a complex town that I don't think we're going to address it piecemeal. It has to be coherent. But I wanted to just get you to confirm that there's been no decision taken to close any specific car parks. I'm thinking particularly about the Central Car Park, and also that there's been no specific decisions on where park and rides might be placed.
No, there's no, I can confirm, certainly no proposal to close any car parks. That's what the consultation's about, what people's thoughts. In terms of where the park and rides go, I have to say there are two logical points, Coxbridge and Shepherd and Flock. Shepherd and Flock, yes, conservation area, all that issue. But those would be the two logical points. In terms of the detailed proposals or anything like that, no.
Chris, it's worth adding that we're working with other councils. We're talking with Hart and Hampshire and others to look at the possibility of reducing further traffic, say, for example, on the A287, and we are talking with them on whether provision of something along that road, for example, would be beneficial to reduce traffic coming into Farnham. So, but nothing is fixed, and that's the next step, trying to sort of take forward the recommendations from the OIP.
Well, Chris, Paula, thank you for that. I have had it, said to me that if we placed park and ride at the two places you suggested, Chris, that people actually, rather than parking and riding and coming to town for a meal or to do some shopping, they would just go and go out to a pub or a restaurant somewhere else. It's really challenging to find somewhere that's going to attract local people. I agree those two places might attract people from outside, well outside Farnham, but they're not going to attract local people.
No, I appreciate that. And of course, not having a go, but people always look for the worst possible case scenario. There will be car parks in the centre of Farnham. There will be, because people will need to access because of their particular needs. So I'm not suggesting for a minute that, we'd be looking to close Hart, Wagon and Central. I'm not proposing closing any. I'm putting a suggestion on the table that they are attracting traffic and they are part of the problem. So, if you're talking about the evening economy, there will still be parking. I've been told not to use my hometown as an example. Durham, which is 60,000 people, has 3 park and rides around it. It has a hopper bus that is provided for out of the park and rides. It has a road charging in the centre of Durham. Goes nowhere, doesn't the road, but it's quite critical because it goes up to the castle and the cathedral. And it has 60,000 vehicles running across a bridge within 100 yards of the centre of Durham. At that time, it was as busy as the A1 next to it. So, they managed it. We managed it. We dealt with it. But there are still car parks in the centre, of course. They didn't remove all the car parks in the centre. And it has a night economy. It was once on radio that a Radio 1 presenter came up to Durham and couldn't book for a meal in the centre of Durham. Not that that's a problem these days, but actually went on air and said that because he couldn't get into a restaurant. Physically wasn't enough tables for him to book, but there was plenty of parking available. So it is just getting that balance. It's not, you know, don't get us wrong. We're not, as I keep saying, we're not saying cars bad, but we've got to have an acceptance that, you know, it's been said a few times. I've said it. It's not people that cause pollution. It's the way people operate that cause pollution, because pollution isn't being caused on the planet by some third-party entity that we've nothing to do with. It's being caused by us. We're causing it. And in the case of Central Farnham, it's with the number of vehicles that are in Central Farnham.
Chris, thank you. Farnham is not Durham, though. But thanks very much. Appreciate that.
No, it's not. It isn't, but it's an example of, you know, what can be done. Farnham's about half the size.
Thank you, Chris. Can we go to Christopher Whitehouse?
Yep. Yeah, no, I just wanted to chime in and say that, yeah, I mean, I think one thing actually that sort of occurred to me, sort of off the back of the discussion about bus routes, is that is there, I'm not sure if I remember reading the plan anything about further connections from Farnham to Fleet, because I think that would be in terms of buses, because that's one thing which, as the crow flies, it really isn't far at all, and driving really isn't that far. But yeah, getting there is a bit of a faff, and I think there'd be a lot of economic benefit from, well, certainly speaking personally, plenty of friends from work who live in Fleet would be very eager to come down to Farnham and spend money at the pubs if they could catch a bus down. And yeah, also I'd just like to echo that again. I suppose I'm a bit of an iconoclast on the central car park question. I think, yeah, you probably can't remove all the car parks, but that one in particular strikes me as yeah, a strange use of prime space, which could be occupied by rate-paying businesses or tax-paying residents. Yep, that's all from me.
Thank you,
Chris, can I just pick up on the buses, John? Is that all right? Because
Yeah,
there's
sure.
quite a few other questions in the Q&A regarding the buses. I would like to let people know that we are engaged with Stagecoach to understand the current route, how we can improve the current service, and work with them to extend it, make it more user-friendly, more reliable, so that people can choose it more actively over other modes, and hopefully congestion reduction will help us with that reliability piece. We're also talking to them around the decarbonisation aspiration and how we can work with them to launch the electric buses in the future for Farnham. So just wanted to let people know about that. I think answers quite a few of the questions. And Chris, looking at the connection to Fleet and the wider areas is also part of that piece of work.
Thank you, Paula. Max Lyons, please.
Thank you very much indeed. In answer to something that Chris said, and to support you all, Chris said no one likes change. We do want change. We want less traffic in the town centre. So I think we should all support the OIP and move on and see what the proposals are or the potential solutions are. And in answer to something else Chris said, you can't pass a law to stop through traffic, but the one thing you can do to stop through traffic is to pedestrianise bits.
Yes. Yeah. That's the way to do it, but of course then that affects locals as well, so it's getting.
Of course, it has repercussions definitely, but let's move on, support the OIP, and get round to the solutions, and then we can debate the solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Okay, Catherine Powell, would you like to come up, because I think you made a few comments in the box.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Catherine, go ahead.
No, perhaps not. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Gosh, that's really loud. So I guess a couple of things. One of the things that's been discussed is obviously the fact that if you do pedestrianise the town, then the traffic is displaced. I think there's a lot of concern in North Farnham that there's a huge amount of development that is outside of Surrey that's planned on the borders of North Farnham. And I know that I received a response from Paula today to this query saying that that would be looked at. But I mean, that is an absolutely critical issue, particularly for the people in North Farnham. When you look at where the housing is being built, it's on the ends of the roads that go through the centre of town. And if it doesn't go through the centre of town, it goes through Upper Hale Road. And neither are good. Neither are acceptable at the end of the day. But a solution is not just a solution for Farnham, it's a solution for the whole area. And I think as long as we continue to look at this as an issue for Farnham, we're not solving the right problem. You know, I understand, and don't get me wrong, I would love to see the centre of town pedestrianised, it would be fabulous, but I don't want to see that at the cost of the villages in North Farnham being destroyed more than they've already been destroyed. And that's a key issue for me. But the other thing that we've done some analysis on is not all the Hgvs are through traffic. You know, do you define, and I guess this is a question for Wyatt and Steve and Chris, if you have a truck handling waste material going from a site that's in Recklesham to a site that's on Beacons Hill Road, is that through traffic? I think that's a really difficult one. Because you know what, the survey we did recently, that's where a lot of the traffic is going to and from. And I think that's access, because Beacons Hill Road is less than a mile away from the border with North Farnham. But, you know, I think that if we had a 20-mile-an-hour zone, the data that we've analysed said that it would significantly reduce, you know, the number of cars that would route this way, because sat-navs would say it's a slower route. So although I agree that maybe 20 miles an hour doesn't help you with air pollution, it does make the travel time longer. So, you know, to me, and I think to the people that we've communicated with as part of the North Farnham Voice Group, and we've had some really good, very interactive conversations, it's all about, please can we have an integrated solution and stop talking about Farnham as just a town, because Farnham as a town can't solve this problem. You know, we can solve bits of the problem, but we can't solve the whole problem. And it's just a plea to really, please look at the whole picture. I know it's hard. Geez, I know it's hard. I've tried to pull the data together over the last couple of months. I know it's hard, but please help us. North Farnham needs help.
Chris, I'm wondering, can one of the team give a sort of overview of what you think are the realistic options that we can do in North Farnham to help that area, at the same time do things in the town centre?
Can I ask Alex?
I could come in.
Yeah.
Kathleen, I think you're so right. There's a massive issue there, and it shouldn't be a Upper Hale Road versus Castle Street debate wherever you live or wherever it's taking place. The fundamental problem, I think, or the first problem is to get the traffic that should be going along the M3 and down the A331 to be doing that. If we get the HGV ban on those two roads, it is going to be much more difficult for the HGVs to use that as a shortcut. And the trouble is, of course, that there's nobody in the team that makes up the Farnham Infrastructure Programme that has any power to do anything in Hart or Rushmore or any part of Hampshire at all. So whilst it's great that Paula and the team are talking to the others, talk doesn't win votes, so they won't make those changes unless it'll benefit them directly. I know Stephen has similar views on much of this.
I'd just like to add that, Catherine, you've picked up some really good points there, and I would like to assure you that we are acutely aware of the cross-boundary issues, and we are connecting and collaborating actively with all the neighbouring councils around the load that would be generated in North Farnham, and then impact Upper Hale Road and the town centre. And we will be considering that. Our proposals will take into account the additional loading that will be coming outside the Farnham area, but will be impacting Farnham. And Alex might want to expand on some of the Upper Hale issues associated with that.
Yeah, sure, happy to. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I agree with Paula. You know, there's a lot of good points in what you've raised. As you say, none of this is an easy solution. It's not a quick win. None of us can wave a wand and just solve all of this. There's lots of things that need to be segued together. Some can be done quickly. Others require more work, more data, more thought. We are looking at a number of measures to try and tackle some of the things that you've mentioned. So we are looking at speed reduction measures. I popped you a bit more of a detailed response in response to your written question, and a link to the study that we produced that goes into a bit more detail. I won't go through all of it because it's quite lengthy, but yeah, we are looking at measures in some of the areas that you've mentioned to try and reduce speed, both from a safety perspective and to improve people's comfort walking and cycling and getting around, getting to school, getting to work, getting to the shops. But also, as you say, that should hopefully help with reducing the sort of attractiveness, in quote marks, of utilising those routes as cut-throughs rather than on the higher order strategic road network. So that's something we're looking at. There is obviously the HGV ban that we're looking at. In addition to that, you're right, it is difficult in terms of, the law stipulates we need to have an exemption for access. So some trips will still be, falling under that access route if they are quite local and there isn't an alternative road. But for those that there is an alternative road or from further afield, that should hopefully address those, and that will significantly reduce the volume there. So there's a package of measures. We're also looking at and have proposed in the OIP that we undertake a much more detailed study of Upper Hale Road, because you're right, there are a lot of competing demands for that space and there is no single sort of silver bullet for it. So it does require a bit more thought. There are some things that we can do quickly, which we'll do, but there are some other things to try and unravel some of those more nuanced and difficult ones that you've alluded to that need us to spool up our brain cells and work out a solution for you.
Thank you, Alex. Stephen Spence.
Thanks, John. I mean, I just think I keep going back to the fact that over the last 50 years, there have been numerous reports written and nothing happened. And in this debate, there are some people who still believe that nothing should happen because they think everything should just be left as it is. Effectively, the traffic market will sort itself out. I mean, I don't think that. I think there was congestion long before the Orcas, and on a bad day, it was as diabolical as anything that's been there since the Orcas. And on a good day, it moved just as the traffic moves, even though the Orcas are there. So there's clearly a better cycling, pedestrian and car balance that is needed. So all of those points that have been gone through by people basically are saying, quite openly that everything is on the table. The bitey bit is going to be the bit from here in, because everything on the table is not going to be able to be achieved. So those points that Catherine has raised about North Farnham, which are absolutely right. And if there isn't a solution for North Farnham, then honestly, people will be lighting their torches and bringing out their pitchforks and be marching down to make sure pedestrianisation never happens. So there has to be a decent resolution, but not everybody's going to get everything that they want. Because nothing's been done for 50 years, the thing is such a mess. It's such a giant Gordian knot. And when you add in all the stuff about outside Farnham, the other developments, the housing developments, et cetera, we have got a real battle on our hands to come up with a solution that works for everybody. And the last thing I want to say is, because the reason nothing happened for 50 years is when it got to the bitey bit, people started fighting with each other. And to be honest, the people, the powers that be, walked away and said, okay, then we're not going to bother. So we do have an opportunity not to resolve absolutely everything, because I don't believe that can be done in the 4 years while Andy and I have been in. We've made some progress, and in the next period, we'll make some more. We won't resolve everything, but we can resolve some things. Those HGV bans are important. They won't fix everything, but they will fix a lot. And clearly what I hear tonight is a majority view in support of doing something. And clearly what we're going to try and do is something that's got a bit of everything that redresses the balance as best we can. And if we achieve that, we'll have done half a century's work in less than a decade.
Okay, Alex. Sorry, I meant Andy.
Thanks, John. Following up on some of the comments that Catherine made about all the development that's happening round about Farnham, particularly she referred to North Farnham, but actually It's happening in every side of Farnham, not just North Farnham. There is a distinct lack of regional planning that goes on in the planning system. And that happened because the government replaced regional planning quite a few years ago by a thing called the duty to cooperate. And as Wyatt actually put it quite well, and the local councils they just don't cooperate with each other actually, and that creates the problem that you don't get integrated solutions. But the government has now recognised that this duty to cooperate doesn't actually work, and they're reshaping the planning system. Hopefully, some form of regional planning will come back. And then in the southeast, an organisation has been set up by most of the county councils south of London, called similar to Transport for London, called Transport for the Southeast. That's an embryonic organisation that's just getting underway, but that will, if it's given the proper authority by central government, that will help solve this problem that Catherine is referring to. The other thing I was going to do, actually, looking through the questions on the Q&A box, there was a specific question that I can actually answer, so I'll do that. It's from Maria Fitch. Do we know exactly when Brightwells will be finished or an estimate? Well, I happen to be the portfolio holder for Brightwells at Waverley, and the actual build of the scheme in terms of the commercial side, the restaurants, the shops, and the car park will be finished by about September, and the scheme will open provided there's sufficient tenants by that stage, and hopefully there will be. So the scheme, that part of the scheme will open in September, but there's still continuing development in Brightwell that will go on through to 2023 of all the additional residential stuff to be done, and some of the landscaping and things surrounding the central part of it. So the whole scheme should be finished by 2023, but there should be an opening later this year of the commercial side, and also the cinema by about December as well. Real cinema planning to come in by hopefully before Christmas. So if all goes well, that's what will happen. We'll have a good new scheme up and running later this year. Subject, of course, to Chris Nicholson managed to get sufficient tenants into the scheme. So I think that's of interest to everybody in Farnham. So I thought I'd answer that question. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Andy. Tom Lancaster, you've made a few points in the Q&A box. Would you like to comment, if you're there? No, he perhaps wasn't expecting to be called. If he's not there, I'm going to go to Ian Harrison, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much indeed. First of all, can I just say, having read the OIP in quite a bit of detail and listened to this brief, I think it's a good piece of work. It's I can completely understand the challenge of creating something like this. So actually, I congratulate the team, the broad team, on doing that. I mean, it's not without its challenges. And the one word that sort of struck me that's come out of this session tonight, and indeed reading the plan, is the importance of integration and the integrated solution. And in creating that, I can see the challenges of bringing in other councils and the like. And I guess the observation is perhaps just being able to affect the things that you can. But it strikes me for Farnham and its environs immediately, the real benefits are with that integration and then the affordability of the measures that can be delivered. And how do you envisage the sequence of that happening? Because there's a real danger that you've got a dribbling implementation of a plan over a number of years, potentially a decade. You don't actually realize the real benefits of this plan without those integrated solutions. And so the secondary question, maybe related to that, to what extent can you experiment further? I mean, it's very clear that the town centre situation currently is a bit of an experiment as well as a reaction to COVID. So can other experiments be undertaken to perhaps improve the quality of the evidence gathered? And maybe just the last point is, with the pedestrianisation of the town, does that not actually then create an east-west separation in the town as opposed to the north-south one that one focuses on just now? Thanks very much.
Okay, anyone?
Can I answer on that one, yes. John? I mean, yes, but that assumes two things. The first assumption is that we're looking at full pedestrianisation, and we could be, but the proposal is to widen footways. We haven't actually said that's what we need your views on. Would you like to see full pedestrianisation or not? And splitting the town, well, not if we provide satisfactory alternatives. And it comes back to the point, and the number of questions that keep coming up, say it yet again, we need to look at the alternatives and put the alternatives in first, the carrots, before we look at the restrictions. But if the proposals in terms of, say, car parks, and if there's a genuine feeling that for some reason Farnham can't cope with park and rides, and seriously, I don't know why, but if there is some good reason why Farnham can't cope with park and rides, and that's not to say taking out all the car parks in the centre at all, then obviously we need to look at that, because that then makes a fundamental difference to what you can actually do in the town centre, maybe. It's about having this debate and having this, and where you might blame us for this. We're desperately not trying to jump to solutions. And yet the number of people that are jumping to solutions, we're desperately not. We're trying to put options on the table, and tell us what your thoughts are about the options. You know, do you like Farnham as it is? No, the Hgvs aren't going to stay. They're interim. You know, seriously, we asking questions like that. But what do you want Farnham to look like? That's the question we're asking. And then it's the art of the possible. What are the compromises that have to be made to do that? And yes, you'd have to look at things like that, because you certainly don't want to recreate another divide. It's a point that is, you know, very well made, but it is just getting that balance.
Sorry, Chris, if I may, I was actually asking about the art of the possible, and therefore the integrated solution being the place it needs to be, given the dependencies between the different measures. And I think the challenge you'll face was going to be one of the time frame in which you can produce that integrated solution, given, you know, the inevitable flows of funding. And it's just therefore, how might you see that working best? And the supplementary was around the opportunity for experimentation to try and test and evaluate some of these along the way.
And that latter point is perfectly right. And, you know, I'm not going to make any excuses. Of course, we want to see with interest what the planters and the Hgvs have done to traffic. And we have tweaked them. We have tried to make it better. Now, all right, we still don't know, because, of course, the volume of traffic is down. But the volume of traffic is creeping back up again. There's been a national survey released today that's showing it's re-creeping up. It's about 73% pre-COVID. So volumes are increasing again. And yes, you're right, it is the integrated approach. In terms of funding, I mean, Surrey and its partners have put, you know, the money on the table. Surrey has already identified that, you know, 139 million potentially. Now, quite a substantial bit of that is grant, I have to say, from central government, hopefully. And we're trying to give it the best case possible to get that grant. But yes, I mean, these are the things. And to be fair, probably why Farnham's been studied to death and nothing's happened.
Okay, Chris, thank you. Tom Lancaster, are you there now?
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
So the question about the mechanism of the OIP, because obviously it's going along, it's got its own cadence, you've got to do your due diligence and not rush into things and get feedback. But in the meantime, there are a number of, I mean, developments are actually causing a lot of the problem, you know, bringing in extra traffic and building materials and things, but they also occasionally offer some opportunities. So I was wondering, you know, as with Brightwells, but there are other developments around, how is the infrastructure program going to respond to these? Because you could miss an opportunity. There are developments going on in Badshot Lee, and then we see a Badshot-Lee superhighway that's quite problematic on the OIP, and yet there are a couple of developments that could really open up Badshot-Lee that are being built at the moment.
Okay.
I mean, but the development, I mean, Tom, we've already had sort of discussions on this, and I've been talking to our development control people. So we are looking at what we can do for early quick wins, and our development control people are fully aware of, as you'd expect, of the OIP and what we're looking for. So they are desperately trying to ensure that any new development, existing developments retrospectively necessarily refit, but we will look to take the opportunity where we can with what we term the quick wins. And you know, the two classics are the Hgv, and how long have people been going on about Hgv? And we are advertising an order on the 19th of March. What more can I say? 20 mile per hour may not be the ideal, may not be looking at 20 mile an hour across the board, but we are looking at 20 mile per hour in the town centre and in other locations. Let's build on that. Let's celebrate it, for goodness sake. We are doing things. The next one we're looking at is road reclassification, because that's seen as a major issue. We are looking at that. The board asked us to look at that, so that's the next thing we're looking at. And we are looking certain things, Tom, you may be aware, we're looking at the Scholars Route through Farnham Park. People will probably have a view about that for cyclists. So these are all the quick wins. So we will take the opportunity, rest assured, to try and incorporate. I'm not saying we will get it right. You know, human nature is not like that. I defy anybody to stand in front of me and tell me they never got anything wrong, because I'll show you someone that's never made a decision. But we will try our best. And, you know, it's in the delivery, and hopefully you'll see we are delivering, or we're starting to deliver.
Okay, thank you, Chris. There's questions in the Q&A box from John Watson, Paul Hoskins, Jerry Hyman. If they want to speak, but I'm going to ask Wyatt Ramsdale if he wants to comment now, please.
Tom, I'm not sure I understood your question correctly, but because the question I thought I heard isn't what Chris has just answered. I don't disagree with Chris, but replanning and getting locations where new houses are going to be built to help fund to solve problems has been getting more difficult. Back in the days of Section 106, they had to be specifically linked, which was good because then the money had to be spent in the exact location. But now we've moved to this CIL, or community infrastructure levy, and it's much more woolly. In theory, any money taken from a site to CIL could be spent anywhere in the whole of Waverley, or indeed perhaps other locations in Surrey. But if you're talking to your councillors and you want a connection made between a development and getting funds out of it, Section 106s, where their specific needs linked to the site, can still be raised and made. So it's not something we as county councils can do, because those conditions are much more to do with borough council activities. I know Paul Follows is in on the call, and maybe in his role as deputy leader at Waverley, if I'm still right, Paul, you might like to comment, but thank you.
Yes, I would just clarify on CIL. I'm not entirely sure beyond highways projects that it can be spent outside of its borough of origin, although it's certainly true that it can be spent within the borough of origin, whether that be from the specific site or not. CIL goes through a fairly convoluted process, which is still being developed, and actually Surrey and Waverley and other organisations actually have to go through a bid process for that money. So it's not a case of somebody can just jump in and take the money from another part of the borough, say a development in Godalming, and the money goes to Farnham or something like that. It's not quite that straightforward, but the intent of it is to provide more infrastructure to support development. I'm not going to say I think it covers all of the infrastructure that's required for most of the development that we have going on. I still think there's a lot of issues with the planning system in that regard that mean almost any development is lacking either in road or water or other type of infrastructure relative to the amount that it actually puts a burden on the area in question. But I think realistically, as a group here, we are going to have to try and, I know we're already working with these neighbouring authorities, but we are going to have to see if we can do a little bit more working with them about some of these extra outside of Surrey border issues that are clearly going to impact Farnham. So if you're residents looking in on this, the SIL process is something that I would very much urge you to read up on and get engaged about, and certainly the borough will try and do a better job at communicating how that works so residents can engage with it a bit easier too. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Siobhan Douglas McGowan. Who's someone like to speak there, please?
Sorry, I'm slightly nervous of giving my comment actually, because I don't want it to come across as negative. I think I've read the report. I think you guys have done an awesome job of trying to work through all of the problems, and I really like the solutions, particularly the ones that you're trying right now and pushing with, like Hgvs and 20 miles an hour. I guess I wanted to speak because there's perhaps one viewpoint that I haven't heard expressed yet at the meeting, which is one of someone like myself who lives in Castle Street. So I bought a modest flat at the bottom of Castle Street. And I suppose as someone who lives right in the town centre, where we talk about things like pedestrianisation or widening pavements or removing parking spaces, I find myself ever so slightly petrified because it's important to me to be able to get into my house and away from my house. And I'm nervous about losing the ability to park. Petrified probably, I saw your face there, Chris. Petrified is not the right word, but I guess the only thing that I want to make sure is that people who live in the town centre, and I think there's more and more of them, that their sort of needs are considered, as well as the people who traverse the town centre.
Thank you.
Thanks, Siobhan. Yes, of course, but that applies equally to South Farnham and North Farnham. So, I mean, I've answered a question from Catherine that what we're not about is shifting the problem to somebody else. So, the Hgvs are a classic example. The order will remove through Hgvs out Farnham, which will help Castle Street. Big issue at the moment with the amount of heavy vehicles running down. But we've also made sure that where we locate it doesn't just reroute them through Upper Hale. So it's going back to that point about ensuring the balance, but we are listening to everybody, and it certainly isn't a case of just imposing somebody else's problem elsewhere.
Thank you, Chris. Jack Slim. Or yes, you're there. Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to say how sad I am that Chris Tunstall is going, because he's a straight talker and he's had a lot of experience, and he doesn't hold back. Also, following up something what Andy McLeod was talking about, I think I'm going to be rather radical and unpopular here, in that I can't help thinking that Farnham's transport problems would be easier to solve if it were taken out of Waverley and Surrey and integrated into a more practical unitary authority based on Rushmore, Aldershot and Guildford. And with the development of Norfolk Park and Coxbridge, Farnham's urbanisation will be even more pronounced. I understand that some residents will cling to the notion that Farnham is still in some rural loan share, but in reality that's no longer the case. We're part of a built-up area conjoined with our neighbours. That built-up region has interlocking transport problems that cannot be solved piecemeal by individual parts. In a large authority, we could have our own mayor with genuine powers and financial clout to solve its urban problems. It doesn't mean to say we'd lose any more green space. On the contrary, we would be able to argue that as an urban authority, we need the green spaces like Tice's Meadow. As part of Waverley, it can always be argued, and has been, that there was loads of green spaces east of the A3, and the green belt of Farnham can be sacrificed. What it does mean is the unitary authority will efficiently share its back office systems. It will have political clout, the money and the planning to construct real public transport like mass transit, metro light railway systems, and pool its resources at brownfield sites. I'm sorry to be so negative. I think you've got to do what you can do, but look towards a future where we're in a totally different unitary authority.
Thank you,
Wondering, John, if I could pick that one up, because it's yeah. So as you know, Surrey made some attempt to form a single unitary, which many of us at the borough level didn't particularly like the idea of, and did fault that. And at the moment, that does seem to be on the back burner at the government level, though I do expect it to come back. As part of that process, what we had done is commission a report on closer collaboration between the boroughs of Surrey. And as part of that within Waverley, we also then started having conversations about, are there possibilities to form other unitary authorities, either with other boroughs in Surrey, our neighbours, or even potentially, because we're obviously on the edge of Surrey, with other boroughs or other areas on the outside. So particularly, and I'm a Godalming councillor, but my colleagues in Hazelmere are particularly interested in talking to boroughs to the south of Waverley, but also in your case, you've got boroughs on the other side that you might be interested in Farnham. And what we've been finding when we've had those discussions is that whenever there's even some discussion about unitaries, it's always kept within the bounds of the current counties. And actually, we've been told on every occasion that we've inquired that however much sense it would make to work with some of the boroughs outside of Surrey, either in Hampshire or other places, we've been told realistically it is extraordinarily unlikely that would happen, and that we need to sort of keep our focus within Surrey. So at the moment, we have been, and this was discussed at our last full council at Waverley, we have been discussing closer collaboration with Guildford. And certainly in my head, I also agree that some level of unitary would be a good idea, but not a Surrey-wide one. So something like Guildford, Waverley and Mole Valley, for example, if we have to keep it within the confines of Surrey, so that we can actually take more of these things in the round rather than borough by borough. But so my apologies. We tried and have asked those questions about extra Surrey borough working, and I've been told very clearly at every occasion that that's extraordinarily unlikely to happen. So sorry to just to say it so bluntly, but that's what we've been told so far.
Thank you, Paul. Now we're getting near to the end of the session. So let's take a question from Janet Galini. Janet, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm afraid this is rather more micro than the macro solution just posited. It's about the central car park. When I first came to Farnham, I was astonished, as Chris Tunstall was, that such an enormous car park was located so close to the historic buildings, and I found it very strange. But I do actually use that a great deal. I don't walk easily. Before COVID, I would take the bus into town quite happily, but my walking has got considerably worse, and I find that the central car park suits me admirably for those small jobs that I need to do in the town centre. I'm quite happy to go back to a bus if the bus stops are in a sensible place, but the proposed uses of the car park worry me, because either it's going to be a piazza or it's going to be a freight transfer station. And if it were a piazza, well, we do have the bottom of Castle Street in the borough as a wonderful historic space if some sort of pedestrianisation or shared priorities is conceived, or Brightwells is creating some sort of piazza. So I wonder how many piazzas we actually need. And secondly, if it's a freight transfer station, surely instead of the car park, the cars coming into park, you're going to have the fleets of electric vans offloaded to e-cargo bikes to be pedalled around the pavements, widened or not, getting in the way of pedestrians as they deliver from their rickshaws. So, you know, does it make sense to take the car parking out and put in freight transfer? Possibly not. So that's just I wanted to make the point about the car park.
Thank you, Janet. Who would like to
Can I
respond?
just answer the freight transfer thing? Because I think, yes, the OIP isn't as clear as it should be. Within the study that we did on HGVs, one of the big problems, although we're doing the HGV ban, a far bigger problem was the advent of white van man, woman, or person, should I say, and just indiscriminate parking that occurs on the roads within Farnham to do deliveries. And I know they've got a job to do. And one of the thoughts there was that for those sort of deliveries, we could carve a bit of space out of some of the car parks to allow for them to park in the car parks. And that's what we're really looking at in the centre. We're not looking at a full freight transfer. We're looking more at some of the space being utilised for the smaller vans that are making one-off deliveries. It's really the big stuff that we'd look at, the big Hgvs that we'd look at for the freight transfer centres. In terms of people with, I know Paula may have mentioned this, but people that have mobility issues, of course, we will always, Janet, look to provide that. So, but not everybody that parks in Central Car Park has a mobility issue. Yeah. But we will look to re-provide. We are again not saying that everybody's going to have to use the bus, everybody's going to have to cycle, everybody's going to have to use the park and ride. We will come up with a solution that will meet, hopefully, everybody's needs. It may be that some people have to park a bit further out. But you know, I have this view that, is it right that people just impose their will on other people just because it's more convenient for them? So it's more convenient to park in a central car park who are quite able to walk a few hundred yards.
It's true.
And the central car park, let's have it right, the central car park was never a central car park. It was a market.
Right. Well, fair enough. But I just want to say, as I did always envisage that the smaller transfer vehicles would be the little electric vans you get in Bologna and places like that, rather than cargo bikes. I can't see cargo bikes really working, but that's just my point of view.
It does work, Jeanette. It does work elsewhere. Cambridge is a classic example of that.
Yeah.
Cambridge is pretty flat, I accept, although they've got one hill. But to be fair, the town centre's flat. You know, it's not. Once you get up Castle Street, where are the rest of the shops as you get up Castle Hill?
I was looking at Bologna recently, and somebody on one of the websites, or consultation sites, suggested that it might be a good idea to give us some examples of how it is working in other European towns. And I understand that Bologna is the most environmentally developed town, and so something like that would give people confidence that it could work here, perhaps. Anyway, yes. Thank you very much, Francis.
And Atkins will be able to provide us with that.
Thank you. Max Lyons, did you want to say something?
Just very quickly, the central car park used to be the cricket club and tennis courts originally. Well, back in history.
Okay, Max. Thank you.
That's interesting to know. Thanks, Max.
Okay, I'm going to draw this to a close now, if that's okay. I'd like to thank everybody very much for coming along tonight myself as the chair. It's been a very constructive discussion, and it's good to see that people are coming up with, you know, forward-looking, helpful ideas and not just saying it's all too difficult for everybody. So I'm going to leave it at that and just hand over to Andy, who's going to just make some concluding remarks. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks very much, John. I wonder, Ian, if you could bring up the last slide, the one that's entitled What Comes Next. I'll be using that in my concluding remarks. But while you're doing that, I'd just like to start, first of all, by thanking the audience, the attendees at this meeting. We started off with about 95, I believe, and we've still got, it says 62, and it only started to drop off after about 8 o'clock, which you'd expect, I guess, for various reasons. But the audience have been really good tonight. We've had really good discussion. Most of the LLF meetings have been good, but this has been a pretty good one, in fact. Very interesting point, very good discussion. So thanks to the audience, but also thanks to Ian and his team at the Town Council who've done all the organisation, and they've done it well as they always do. Thanks, of course, to the speakers, Chris and Alex and Paula and so on, and to John for chairing it. this slide shows what's happening next. This consultation finishes on Sunday the 14th of March, and people need to be aware of that to do the responses. But there's three more LLFs to happen. The first one is next Monday, and that'll be very similar to this one, but with a slightly different cast actually. The new program director, Simon Duke, will be coming along and so we'll be seeing him in action for the first time. And Alex will be replaced on that by his colleague, Jonathan Foster Clark. So he'll be covering the ground that Alex covered at this meeting, but Paula will still be here. So the next meeting will be much the same, but it might be interesting for people who even attended to this one to attend that one as well, because there's a slightly different cast, and they'll get to hear from Simon Duke and so on. And then following that one, that's next Monday. On the following Wednesday, next Wednesday, there's two sessions in fact. One in the afternoon, which is a Facebook live session. That'll actually be chaired by Simon Duke. It's going to be run by the program team, rather than by councillors. But again, everybody's, particularly the people who are into Facebook, are very welcome to attend that one. And then the final one, in fact, is on the 10th in the evening, and that's going to be chaired by Wyatt. And that's one that will be orientated and aimed at businesses. So that's all I want to say. I think we're just about hit the time, John. So thanks for chairing it well and keeping the whole thing to time. So I think we can now close the meeting and look forward to seeing anybody who wishes to come along on Monday. They'll be very welcome on Monday or in the Wednesday sessions as well, particularly the afternoon, not so much the evening one. The evening people can listen to that one and so on, but we want the participants to be the local businesses. So thanks to everybody and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Thanks.